That's the episode where everybody learns how to clap properly in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the Covenant Table Podcast. My name's Steve Huber. I'm one of the pastors here at Covenant. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. And, hey, we have some fun guests on the podcast. Guys, go around and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Josh Bundy, the adult ministry pastor.
Do you like how I pointed at you? Like you wouldn't have known?
Yep. The people watching Spotify.
I'm doing hand cues today. Everything's going to be hand motions.
Cues. Cool. The audio listeners are going to love it.
I'm waiting for mine. Okay, there it is. I'm Jonathan Fitt, part of the creative arts team, lead worship here at Covenant.
Hi, I'm Brad Hummel. I'm one of the many thankful members at our church.
Oh, you're more than that, Mr. Hummel.
I don't know.
You're a ministry staff spouse.
He's a humble Hummel.
That's right.
Yeah.
He is a humble Hummel. Brad and Christy showed up here right before COVID, but still, man, you guys serve in multiple ways with the young adults. I know you teach 5th and 6th graders.
Z56. Great kids.
Which isn't something that, like, there's not people lining up outside the door to hang with that crew. You teach them Bible lessons.
Yeah, you've left that off the spiritual gifts. Teaching teenagers.
Yeah,
that's
that would
a
be
spiritual gift.
It is a spiritual gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys serve in multiple ways. I'm grateful for you. And you've been in business, been at the same company 22 years, been in business for a long time. And we're looking forward to having you jumping in.
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
So one thing we should talk about today, we're recording this on Tuesday. People are voting all over America. And later on this evening and tomorrow and the next day, people will wake up distressed about results. And some people will be elated. Some people will be really bummed out. And we figured, hey, this might be a good thing to think about. As Christians, we're called to pray. This is an interesting instruction. It's in 1 Timothy. So the Apostle Paul is writing to this young pastor, but he writes this letter that's designed to be not just for Timothy, but it's designed to be read publicly. And he says this: "First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth." So, hey, later on today, and we might get to do this Sunday. If we have time, I'm probably going to lead a prayer time this coming Sunday. But, yeah. How should we call people to pray this week, post-election?
You pray for the people, but I think also for the process. Well, and it's really there's more people. There's not just the leaders. There's not just the people who are running for office, but there's all the other people who are involved in the whole process. And that's been really under attack, right, in the last couple of elections. There's a lot of accusations that fly about cheating and about fairness and all that kind of stuff, that there'd be a fair, open process,
That would be peaceful. Pray that be peaceful, and we live quiet lives, godly and dignified. That would be something to pray for our country. Yeah. And I'm just struck too, like, he's intentionally saying all kinds of prayer, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people. So pray for everyone, but for kings and all who are in high positions. So it's not just, we had to pray for the people you didn't vote for, who got elected, and pray for the people whose positions you're concerned about, and pray for the people you voted for. Let's pray for all who land in office. It's balanced. Yeah.
What do you guys think about the idea of Christian duty versus civic duty? Right? Like, is there some sort of call scripturally? Like, what does a follower of Jesus, what's our responsibility as a follower of Jesus as it pertains to a democratic election process? Some people are like, well, we all have to vote this way, and other people are like, well, we all have to vote that way, and then other people are like, I'm not voting at all. I'm opting out of this whole thing. What's your guys' thoughts on that?
Brad, you brought this up earlier, actually, before we were going to record the podcast. Could we think of it as an area of stewardship? So there's like, we're in this series called Steward. Whatever gift you have, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. 1 Peter 4. But we could zoom out and think through stewarding our citizenship. We have the ability to vote. And, hey, is that a helpful lens? Hey, I want to steward that well. What's your point? That like, hey, sometimes people make that too clear cut what the right Christian thing to do is in a broken world with imperfect parties, imperfect candidates.
Yeah.
Christians.
Yeah, I guess it's the struggle of if you're one of those people that feels like neither of the two options you're presented with are good options, do you have a responsibility to vote for what you see as the lesser of two evils, or is following your conscience into not voting at all an acceptable response for the believer? I think that's an interesting question.
It is a really complex question, and I think over time, voting has become increasingly complex. There's a lot of information that's available, more than there ever was, but there's also a lot of, I think, ways that information is used to sway people, positively and negatively. It's hard to sort through it, and we frequently, I think, find ourselves in a situation where you have a hard time voting for the person that you want the most, like that you really respect their character. Hopefully, that they have a godly heart, a godly mind, and they want to do God's will in office as a believer. But that's not always the case. And I guess I don't think I've got a perspective that is a right and wrong on it. The way that I personally perceive it is that, first and foremost, my citizenship is in the kingdom of God, and that's where my identity is. But God, for whatever reason, put me in America as well, and I've got the ability to influence with a vote. And so I try to be responsible with that, just like I would be responsible with money that he entrusted me with, or a relationship or property. And I do some research, not exhaustive. I pray about it, and then I act. And normally that means voting for me. But there have been times where I just haven't been able to sort it out. Like, I can't in good conscience vote for a candidate. And then
You just like don't.
I don't.
Like you'll like go through the ballot and like, hey, on this one, I don't have an opinion about these two, and just opt out of choosing one of those. Yeah, it's probably helpful to say. Obviously, this could be a whole other podcast. I'll call in sick that day. I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't. But in a imperfect world, as Christians who are in the process of being sanctified with incomplete information, imperfect parties, imperfect candidates, that there does seem to be, to me, this is important to emphasize. It's really important to say, hey, we can be Christians. Our deeper citizenship is in heaven. We can be together in the body of Christ and disagree about what the wisest move is politically on certain issues or candidates in a given election. And that shouldn't freak us out.
Yeah.
And let's be the church together. It was actually one of the covenant reflects a political diversity that's actually in the community too, which I'm grateful for. It was part of the pastoral search team too. I've told this story a couple times. It's a fun story to tell. In applying part of the discernment process, would I be a good fit for covenant? My second meeting, Max Nichols, the head of the pastoral search team, texted me and said, "Hey, Steve, would you talk about issues of justice, race, and difference of a political difference in theological positions, and also would you lead the Zoom?" And it was a couple things. It was like, we're going to talk about racial stuff, justice stuff, difference of theological opinion, and it was reminding me it's going to be on Zoom.
Just a couple softballs.
Just couple easy ones, but it was a fruitful discussion. We had a lot of follow up afterwards, and the pastoral search team was like, we have different convictions on some of these things, but we want to be together in the church, and that to me is like really beautiful and important. That's worth fighting for.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the diversity. I see, other churches. Like I was looking at my Facebook feed, which is generally just not a good thing.
It's just a great setup for
I'm
a good antidote. I was looking at my Facebook feed,
and someone was talking. Oh, we preached this great sermon this past Sunday on how to flip these kind of voters. Like from their side to our side. You know what I mean? It's like, oh man, that just like does something in my stomach. That's like, that's just so not, what the gospel ought to be centered on, So I'm grateful for the diversity that we have here. But it's like, yeah, I mean, I find myself, I don't want to like fall into being too cynical. You know what I mean? I think that's an easy thing to do, and I do find that's where I probably go. In my darker moments, like none of these guys really believe anything they're saying. You know what I mean? Like, and so how can I get behind any of this stuff? You know what I mean? And, so it's good. I like what you were saying, Brad, about trying to really dig into it. I think too often people just make it about one issue, which is just kind of like a quick, cheap way out, in my opinion. It's like, well, I'll just say that this one thing is the most important thing, and I'll just vote for whichever candidate agrees with me on this issue. And it's like, yeah, that's so not nuanced. And so, but anyway, that's me. I struggle with elections for this reason, because it's like, it's hard, as you were saying, like for me to figure out how to do something that I feel really good about.
Yeah. We're all doing the best we can. Hey, one hot tip that'll, I'm concerned for our country. I am concerned for our country. You know what will make you grateful for America? Traveling abroad. And you travel abroad and see other places really struggling, or just how like the political process is only anarchy and chaos or basic things. And it's always made me grateful for the stability our country's enjoyed, and how things like the trash trucks work. And basic services.
No matter who wins.
Yeah, no matter who wins.
No matter who wins, trash pickup will occur.
That is a big deal.
The recycling truck will come.
I think it's easy to get really anxious about the outcome and who lands, and we need to continue to pray for whoever is in the office and elected to it as it goes on. It also helps me to think back to the time frame that admonition was given. Like the early church, you want to talk about some bad political leaders? This is in the times of Nero.
Yeah.
But we're
Caesar.
being told to pray for them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah. He wasn't a family-friendly Roman emperor.
No.
There was
they were
no
bad
vote.
people doing wicked things.
There was
There
no
may-
vote.
What'd you say?
There was no vote.
There's no vote. He wasn't voted. Paul said, hey, these wicked pagan leaders who will sometimes persecute you, you pray for them. And all kinds of prayers, intercessions, thanksgivings. Be thankful for times of peace. So yeah,
Where did
helpful
Paul
reminder.
learn? Where did Paul learn that too? The Jews in the temple worship, the second temple, had learned to offer sacrifices for Caesar. Under the threat of being told to offer sacrifices to Caesar, they said, "How about this? We'll pray to our God for you daily." And Rome said, "Yeah, we'll go with that."
Huh.
I did not know that.
That's
history.
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. And I thought you were going to go with something like, hey, Jesus says to...
That
when
would have been
Jesus is like,
great.
hey, hey, you could pray for your enemies too,
Yeah.
like your Father in
That
heaven.
would have been a great reference.
That's another way to answer that question.
That's right.
Yeah. But Jesus...
Hey, there's a sign in Doylestown that says, "Use your God-given right," and then in shout letters, "and vote." What do you think about that? Is it a God-given right to vote?
You could say God-given in like God's providence. He's allowed us to be born in this country and have
Kind
that.
of the same way it's like God gave me this house,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but maybe if I was in a different place at a different time, it's not God given in the sense of every human everywhere born has this right.
There are faithful believers in other countries who are under different regimes. And
Right.
yeah,
No vote, but they're still experiencing God's blessing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I've seen that sign and I've thought about that. I wonder if it is an idea that's crossed from one realm into another, which is that you have a right, an American right. You also have God's kindness and provision and grace in many ways, and those have sort of merged to where somebody that wrote this sign has the idea that it's kind of like, every human being has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
Right.
and to vote, and that's all from God.
It is. There's that conflation because we talk about inalienable rights that come from our Creator in our founding documents, and then some people take that and just put it in a big mixing bowl, and it's like, yeah, our Constitution's pretty much like the Bible. Some people go that place with it, that it's like these are almost like inspired documents of a sort, which is that's a dangerous place to be.
Well, the whole idea of human rights does come ultimately from the development in the West of that idea is from the Imago Dei. The idea of people are made in the image of God and therefore have dignity. And
Yeah, these Timothy and the Ephesian Christians that he's ministering to are probably like 45 or 50 in number. And they're praying for these kings and people in authority in really corrupt systems who don't honor individuals. They don't care about some individual
rights.
slaves and individual rights and women and there was different levels of that in different households and in different places, but generally the more elite you get up, the structure in their world, the less they care about the people at the bottom. And the world got turned upside down by the teachings of Jesus that helped, like the whole world begins to look at individuals as valuable.
Shaped culture in ways that
Babies are worth saving, elderly are worth healing, and providing homes for, the widows and the orphans cared for.
shaped the world, shaped
Yeah,
history,
so
those ideas.
It in some ways, and I want to be careful. I don't think that democracy is the only system God works in or uses, and it might, Jesus doesn't describe himself as president. God is not elected. He's not, he's not the prime minister in heaven. He's the king. So, in that sense, he's okay with monarchy. But here's the point of that. Like, it does seem like there's been some development in the world, and I think a lot of that has to do with the teachings of Jesus and his love for individual people, also his love for nations of people, whole groups of people. And it does seem to some extent that, like, the fact that people get to vote now, no matter really how much they've done or what they've achieved or how powerful they are, does have something to do with God's blessing, like what he wants to release in the world.
Or even the triumph of that idea over time, that like, hey, people matter, their voice matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of
I think it's hard to just chalk that up to just humanism.
correct. And probably that'd be another podcast. But the whole idea of, I'm agreeing with you though, the whole idea of human rights and human value that is thought of sometimes from a secular standpoint of, hey, that's our stuff. That's the liberal vision, owes its development in the West over centuries to the triumph of Christianity in shaping civilizations in the world. Like, hey, we're people of the book. Reading's a big deal. A lot goes back.
And I think that's a great encouragement to Christians to keep obeying 1 Timothy 2, no matter how you feel about your elected officials. Is like, do not give up on this kind of earnest prayer now when God's done so much in the world. let's not let this generation be the one where it breaks down into vitriol, slander, toxic online communication, ditching your relatives at Thanksgiving. Like, let's still be the people of prayer.
Right. Jesus told us to pray and love our enemies, let alone our relatives at Thanksgiving that we don't see eye to eye on. Yeah, let's go. That's a good call, Josh. Let's go back to basics. Hey, let's go back to basics. And these Christians who first heard these words in 1 Timothy 2 had to trust God for a lot more, for like basic protection, freedom of worship. They were thinking about, hey, we could be persecuted, and they were told to pray for their leaders. That's a good call. Well, hey, we have to talk about giving and money. Super easy topic. And I introduced this, sermon on Sunday in a couple different ways. I was like, look, we haven't had a sermon on this topic from what I can tell, like 3.5 years. Of Jesus' 38 parables, 16 are about money and possessions. In the Gospels, 1 out of 10 verses deals directly with the topic of money. So we can't swerve around the cones and like avoid this topic. And yet it's dicey for Christian leaders to address it head on. There has been scandal. There have been examples. Most pastors everywhere serving faithfully, not getting paid a whole ton. They're in it for the right reasons. There are notable exceptions, and there's been scandal, and people are sensitive. Hey, don't. Two different kinds of idols: the church leadership having an idol, or hey, we're going to preach about money all the time because we're trying to have a lot of money. That's an idol, but it's also an idol too for a congregation. It can be an idol to say, hey, this is the one thing we're not going to let you talk about. Hey, don't get in the zip code near my idol. Don't talk about giving and stuff because I'm going to Best Buy later and I'd like you not to get in the way of that.
It's almost like on that side, fear is the idol, right? It's like you're so afraid to offend someone. That now fear becomes the idol, that determines what you just can't talk about.
Sure.
So,
and Jesus has a lot of hard things Jesus has a lot of challenging things to say to us in every area. So it shouldn't be that surprising that money is one of those things. That did you guys hear that stat? So I read the passage in 1 Timothy 6 where he addresses the rich. And it's kind of it's kind of something I wanted to address right away because no one feels rich because there's always someone richer than you. Like if you're in this region of Bucks County, there's people with a bigger rehab barn or they have more acres. There's bigger stuff. So no one feels rich. And so probably the point is just like, hey, how are we going to be faithful with what God gives us? That's probably the thing to wrestle with. And I don't know, there is some comparative stuff.
Yeah, we all get to point at Elon Musk and those guys and be like, yeah, we're not like that. That's the rich. That's like
right. It's not us.
The tenth of a percent, type guys.
But the majority of folks in our congregation are in the top 10% worldwide. If you have $93,000 net worth, if you sell your cars, your home equity, have a yard sale with all your possessions, you're in the top 10%. We're wealthy, man. And so we need to wrestle with this. And also kind of where we land exactly compared to everyone else isn't the point as well. It's basically just like, what are we going to do with what we have?
Yeah.
My favorite definition of rich that I ever heard in a sermon was from an Andy Stanley sermon, the guy from Atlanta. He said, in the time of Jesus, if you had enough money to buy food for 2 days instead of one, you were rich. He's like, the standard of being okay is you earn enough for today. The standard of being rich is you earn enough for today and tomorrow.
Yeah. That's good.
I think we might have talked about it before, but just the idea of discretionary time. You know, the percentage of people throughout all of history, throughout all of humanity, that didn't have to work all day, every day to survive. Like, it's a tiny fraction of a percent. You know, discretionary time that's a luxury commodity, and we have tons of it. We have no idea what to do with all of our time. Some of us, you know.
Yeah. And when the Israelites, and it's carried on, were called to give 1/7 of that time up, that's a big economic impact when you compare that to other nations around them that can work 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day. Yeah, that call to rest. It touches a little bit what we were talking to also about as far as the sacrifices as well. Like, it is a decision on how you're going to invest and use the time that God gave you. We all treat time like it's ours, but every second of every day is a gift from God.
That's good. I haven't thought about that economically in a while. God's command was take 1 day out of 7 and Sabbath. Don't work. You're going to trust me and not work. And they had to trust that they'd be okay and have enough by not working. And there was also, that was given to a nation of rescued slaves. And he was saying, hey, guess what? You're not slaves anymore. You don't have to work like you're slaves.
And every 7th year, take a gap year.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part. We should reinstitute that part of the law.
Let the fields be fallow.
Right?
Yeah.
It'll be okay. I'm in control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every half century, take the 49th and 50th year and take a 2-year gap year.
And have a party during that time, too.
Cancel the
Have a
debts.
party.
Yeah.
Cancel
Jubilee.
people's debts.
So
Yeah.
there's some principles in there. Some direct teaching. Don't work as hard as you could, but save time and energy and presence for other things, for God, for people. You know?
I was trying to think about why is money so, I mean, you kind of mentioned the balance. Like, we can't never talk about money, but we can't always be talking about money. Jesus talked about money all the time, maybe more than any other single thing, you know. I was trying to think about why is it so controversial? Why does it offend so easily? You know, why is it so easy to get out of balance? And I think, you know, I think it's because it's not, sometimes think of money as like a commodity where it's like, well, I have clothes and I have a house and I have money and I have this and I have that. And it's kind of like one of the things I have, like a commodity like that. But it's a much bigger idea. It's our entire value system, right? We can denote all of our belongings with a dollar amount. You know, it's like, what is your house worth? It's not just like that I can live in it. It's like, it's worth a dollar amount. What is your time worth? So it's like we assign a dollar value to everything. So it's really, when we're talking about money, we're not just talking about like a commodity that we have, but we're talking about our entire value system. And, you know, like Jesus said, you know, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. And so it has a way of really revealing, you know, what you're doing with your money has a way of really kind of laying you bare. You know what I mean? And I think that's why we get so up about it a lot of times, is because, you know, we could talk a good game. It's like, hey, we should do this, we should do that. This is good, this is bad, you know, like those kinds of things. So what value have you given to that? What money have you given to that? What have you know what I mean? And so I think that's one of the reasons why it gets people up in arms a lot of times, because it really lays our value system bare, you know?
It touching on our value system, it reminds me of the verse where Paul goes. He says, hey, rich folks, don't be haughty. Don't set your hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. The Apostle Paul is drawn immediately to, hey, in raising this question, I want to make sure that in addressing this issue, think about where your deepest hope is. Think about where your deepest comfort is. Kind of hey, what do we most value? What do we look to for comfort? And having our hope in God, it brings peace.
And
Having a hope in God, it's a better hope.
Yeah.
It's a deeper hope.
And it really is a pretty stark dichotomy. Like when you look at it, like, another thing Jesus said about it was, you can't serve two masters. Either God's value system or the world's value system, aka money, aka mammon. Like you're going to serve one of those two. You're not going to serve both. You know what I mean? So we have our value system and we have God's value system, and money belongs to our. That's how we denote our value system. And when like what you're saying is when our hope is in that, and that's where our heart is. But the call to the follower of Jesus is to submit that, whatever that looks like, to submit that to God's value system and to steward whatever money, whatever resources, whatever value has been entrusted to us according to God's values.
Right. A different set of values.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can share because it's not our foundation in life. It's not like our source of security. What would you say? So how can we be balanced about this? There's a warning about wanting too much to get rich in 1 Timothy 6. The money is the root of all kinds of evil. It doesn't say money is the root of all evil, like it's often quoted. Money is the root of all kinds of evil. And a lot of folks have desiring to be rich, really messed up their life. You can bring pangs and harmful desires, senseless and harmful desires, plunge people into ruin. That can happen by wanting to be rich. But we should want to do well in our jobs and careers. How would you instruct someone wrestling with that? Hey, I want to do well. I run a business. Yeah, I want it to grow. Yeah, I want it to be able to hire more people. I want to have more margin and not be month to month on this or week to week. How would you stir that person up to want to do well, but in a way that doesn't become a craving that would get them off the rails?
I think one of the ways people misquote that verse is forgetting to say the love of money.
Yes.
And just saying money is the root, because it's again
point.
It's about our.
This is the episode where Bundy broke the studio. It's all good. You can just hold it.
Let's go to commercial, guys.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. We're gonna.
I agree with you though, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's about saying why is the love of money? Because you're exalting man's value system over God's value system, right? And that's why it's the root of all these kinds of evil.
He's not saying don't any of you have money.
Yeah, money is not evil.
Money. He's not saying money is
Yeah.
evil. He's loving money too much.
Right.
Is what
Yeah.
is evil. That's a good clarification.
Yeah.
Brad, would you add anything to that? You're with some young adult leaders who are hey,
Yeah.
man.
So I had a conversation with my kids. It was my oldest daughter in particular when she was in high school, and something came up around my career and why we work the way that we do. And it was either around an award or something, and the question was to the tune of do you want to be the best? How do we be excellent in it? And my response to her was that I didn't really think that God called us to individually be exceptional, to necessarily be number one in everything that you do. God just calls us to be faithful with what he's given us in terms of our time and our talents. And sometimes
That's
that
different
faithful
advice.
approach means that you're going to be very average. And that's okay. And sometimes that faithful approach is going to lead to you doing really well. And if that really well results into more coming back in, well, then guess what? That's more for you to be faithful with and to try to use it appropriately. And to just reflect upon that every day. And so when you do find yourself on a podium, give thanks. When you find yourself in the crowd clapping for somebody else on the podium, give thanks, as long as you ran your best race.
That's good advice.
There's a doxology at
different.
the center of this passage. So you've got warnings about wealth and riches on two sides of the kind of Oreo cream in the center is when Paul is going to say to Timothy, here's how you act in this world. And this is like what Brad was just saying to his kids. And what he says, what Paul says doesn't sound like, hey, you know what? You can be anything you want to be. So like, go for it. It's not the American wisdom of like, work hard and achieve the dream. He says, but you as a man of God or a man of God, flee from all of these things, by which he means these things that we just talked about, which is the love of money that leads to it's the root of all kinds of evil. And pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. That's the life that Paul's like, Timothy, go for it. Go for a life where not only are you, so chapter 2, you're praying for those in authority, not trying to dethrone them, and living a quiet and godly life. Chapter 6, he's like, you're not trying to also be like the, what's the word for the people that really run the world with their money? There's some
elite.
kind of, yes, the elite or some kind of like
Illuminati.
yeah, there's like
Oligarchs.
autocrats and oligarchs. Oligarchs
Yeah.
is the word, right? Like you don't need to be that either, right? Like you don't have to control your destiny and everything around you with money either. But again, pursue a life that's full of gentleness and endurance. And he says some great things in verses 11 through about 20. But there's a doxology in here, and I think the doxologies are often the medicine for the problem in the heart. So this doxology is like this. God is the blessed and only ruler. So you want to know who's on the throne? God's the King of kings and Lord of lords. That helps you a little bit with the political issues. Mm-hmm. And then look at what else is in verse 16. God alone is immortal. You think you're going to make your name engraved on something forever and ever by achieving all this wealth? You're going to put your stamp on history. Pastor, you're going to write the book that's going to change lives for the next 10 generations. Like, what is it that we think we're going to accomplish? Achieving a name for ourselves. Again, that doesn't mean we don't work hard. We should value our work. Work's incredibly important. We want to do our work well. But he's like, who's immortal? God's immortal. Who's going to take care of the next generation? God is. He's in an unapproachable light. You want to shine like a star in this world? He's like, guess what? God's in the unapproachable light. I just think there's something about this doxology that's working against the things that we don't say, the motivations we don't speak. It's like, I want fame. I want my name to last forever. I want to be the one that fixes the world's problems. I want the people ruling who I think should be ruling. And this benediction undermines all of that.
That's
Says,
good.
hey, you can be peaceful and quiet and give these over to God.
I feel like there's, like most issues, there's a ditch on either side of the road. And so you have the ditch of saying money itself is evil. You know what I mean? And I know that some people preach that. It's like, hey, if you have money, it's because you're compromising with the world system and you've abandoned God's values and all that kind of stuff. And that's a ditch that we don't want to fall into. But on the flip side, then you have this idea. Some people talk about prosperity gospel and things like that, where it's like, it's not even me wanting to be wealthy. It's that I believe that God wants me to be wealthy, and not that He wants me to be wealthy, but it's actually a sign of my obedience that I'm blessed. You know what I mean? And the more blessed I am with finances, the more that means that I'm doing good things for God. And it becomes like an outward show where it's like, I must be doing really good things for God if I've got a private jet. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. So it's this like sign of blessing, which is not completely foreign to, some of the like Old Testament paradigm of, God saying, hey, like, test me, he says in Malachi, test me in this, like, like if you'll bring all the tithes into the storehouse, like I'll open the windows of heaven, I'll bless you, your storehouses will be overflowing and stuff. And so, but there's a place of imbalance and unhealthiness that we can get into on that side as well. And you reminded me, Brad, when you were talking about, having much or having little, one of the obviously one of the most famous quoted scriptures in the Bible is, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And I was reminded of that verse, because if you back up a verse or two, I'm just going to read it. Paul says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. And I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or living in want. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Right? So he's talking about, like, it's not about, the emphasis isn't on the how much. It's about faithfulness.
Yeah.
And having our hope and our trust in the right place. And if we have that anchored, then we can be faithful with $5 or $5 million or whatever it is that God places in our hand. Yeah.
And he had 2 careers, right? I mean, because he's tent making.
Yep.
We don't hear a whole lot about that career. And the apostle as well. So
You think he wasn't necessarily setting the world on fire with the tents, or what?
I think he was content. I think he was using it to cover needs that were
Content.
there.
I see what you did
You
there.
know? Not intentional.
Not intentional. Oh, come on.
Oh, come on. The other fun question that I like to have when we point towards more of a prosperity perspective, in terms of, if you're living righteously and you're living faithfully, then surely you're going to have prosperity at the end. It's hard for me to find a basis of where our apostles or the disciples, they died in prosperity. They weren't called to that. Now, that doesn't mean that all
Just
of
looking
us...
at the Bible stuff, they had hard lives. They suffered.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that Christians should never enjoy prosperity by any means. But if
It's not a litmus test.
yeah, if you're
Right.
saying prosperity and faithfulness leads to, if righteous living and faithfulness leads to prosperity, I don't see that play out in terms of, a lot of the individuals in the New Testament that we're called to in terms of heroes of faith.
Yeah. And Paul is saying, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, particularly about, I'm okay when I don't have a lot. I know what it is to be in need. The inner things, the inner pursuits that was your parenting, you said to your daughter, hey, be faithful. Sometimes you'll be excelling at the head of the pack. Sometimes you'll be in the middle of the pack or not doing that great, but just try to be faithful. The inner things and having those be life goals, it reminds me of that Tim Kasser's research, who says, like, kids who grow up to value the extrinsic aspirations, wealth, fame, image, versus inner things, meaningful relationships, personal growth, community contributions. We can think about the gospel inner things that we want kids to value. Loving God, loving other people, serving, sharing, generosity, who you are in secret. His research is fascinating because it carries out the truth of 1 Timothy 6. If children value wealth, fame, and image, quote, they faced a greater risk of unhappiness, including anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and problems with intimacy. Plus, they're just meaner. They're, quote, associated with being less empathetic and cooperative, more manipulative and competitive. So, parents, it's really important that we teach our kids to have the right goals. It's not achieving a certain amount. It's being faithful with what you have and the gifts that God's given you. I sent that article to my 18-year-old daughter, who, like, she's the one of our kids who, like, does well with her grades, and just sent her some texts about praying for her heart to have the right heart goals. Not because I'm worried about her not doing well in school, because that seems to be happening, but because the inner things are more important.
Yeah. It's a good question. Like, how do you model this for kids, but in general, how do you lead when the teaching is like, hey, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Like, do these things in secret. Like, don't fall into the trap of, we can all easily fall into this trap of, like, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. And our motivation, I think we need to have that be our prayer, really, that God would just reveal to us our own motivation. Sometimes we're blind to those things, and it's like I'm not giving this money to this person because I love them and because I'm trying to steward resources well. I'm giving it to them because I love the feeling that I get when I do that. You know what I mean? It's like I'm actually building myself up, somehow in doing that. It's like going on the missions trip, and the only thing you ever do is, putting selfies on Instagram. It's like, look how great this is. Look at how great what it is I'm doing here. You know what I mean? And it's like we can easily fall into that kind of trap where we're not serving people. We're actually still serving ourselves, even by giving. We're serving our own ego, our own reputation. And so how we model that for people without, falling into that temptation of, hey, look at me, look how good I'm doing here.
Well,
it is easy to export our own entrapment with riches to children and to folks on the mission field by just trying to give them the things that we think have solved our problems without any processing. And there's been a lot of work done on this, on like what does really good international like missions activity look like when it comes to money and when and how the money is used. Because it really is a problem. Like you'll end up with Americans on the mission field handing out a bunch of cash and not helping anybody and teaching all the wrong lessons. So, verse 8 to me is kind of so here's what it says. It says, if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And my question is that true for you?
Yeah.
Is that true for me? It sounds like a mantra. It sounds like something Paul might have said to himself in prison. Maybe to his fellows, like, hey, we have food and clothing.
With these,
Let's
we
be
will be
content with that. Yeah.
Godliness with contentment is great gain.
Right.
Godliness with contentment.
Maybe he says it to himself on days when he really doesn't feel it. But it sounds like the kind of slogan or mantra or thing that a person repeats and says. It doesn't sound obvious. Like, hey, you know what makes everybody content? Just to have food and clothes for today. It sounds more like something you tell yourself until you believe it.
You have to preach yourself. Would be something. That is something we need to aim to model as parents and as people who, we all affect each other. How we live does affect your friends, your community. Hey, aim to be content. Let's aim. That would be a countercultural virtue to preach on, think about, try to get in our lives. Let's aim for contentment. How would that change our lives if we were just really ask that of God and try to practice that?
It changes your thankfulness too.
Talk about that.
So, because if your baseline is contentment, as in, think about like Maslow's hierarchy. Like, we need food. We're hoping for shelter.
Let's pretend that some people don't know what that is.
Okay, so you've got
not me, other
pyramid
people.
of needs, right?
Sure.
And so if you think about it, as long as my core needs, if God's providing for enough food and water to subsist, right? Clothing or some mechanism of staying warm and sheltering you from the outside. Like you're staying alive, that's there to live another day. Now that's about hardcore. It's rough days. But still, that's what Paul is talking about is I'm content with that. Here's a guy that's been stoned and shipwrecked and everything else, and he's learned how to be content in the roughest of days. When that sets your baseline, the days where you've got heat, you can just enjoy that feeling of laying back in your bed in your own home at night. It's a beautiful feeling, All of this is reason to just thank God for something that you don't deserve and that you only got because of trying to be faithful with the gifts that he gave you too, and recognizing that that's today. They could all be gone tomorrow, and that's okay because that's not what the most important thing is. And he's going to meet our basic needs. And I think once you wrap your head around that and you realize that like in Psalm 24:1, everything is God's. Everything. And that it's really not yours. You just have it in your hand for a moment. that it should call us to change our perspective in terms of possession and to be super generous, which is the other thing. And the question was, how do you model it to others? I think holding on less tightly and being generous whenever you have a chance to. And it's not for the sake of a show. It's just to treat somebody to a meal.
Why do
Or-
people like lose their minds whenever they call the customer hotline and they can't get their thing canceled? You know, like why do people lose their minds whenever they, you know, drop their phone in a trash can? Or I dropped my phone in a toilet this week. It wasn't a great moment.
Bad day.
It was a public toilet. It was on an airplane, and my phone went all the way through the toilet, down like Jonah.
This is going to be a separate podcast. We're just going to we're going to spend about an hour on this.
We're gonna
and talk
clip
about
this
this
out.
adventure.
I'm really hoping that it's still there, too.
Here, there's right there's
there,
at least
dude.
a couple of ways. Yeah, it's right here. It's
He
on the table.
rescued it.
Don't touch Josh's phone.
Disinfected, dude. Note to self: don't lick Josh's phone. Was going to.
Anyways,
will not now.
I mean, in any case, please don't ever do
Phones
that.
are so gross.
Phones are
even,
gross.
Even
They're
ones
just-
that haven't been dropped in a toilet
yeah,
recently.
phones are gross. They're germy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're touching it with unwashed hands, and yeah.
Yeah. Some, our tendency often is to like lose our minds when stuff like this happens. I come out, why am I dropping my phone in a plane toilet? I wanted to see how much flight time was left. I pull my phone out. I immediately whack my elbow on the wall. My phone goes boop. It's like, what? I walk out and I look at the stewardess and I'm like, I never thought I would say this sentence, but my phone just fell down into your toilet, all the way down into the tank. And the stewardesses were like, we can't believe how calm you are. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One reason for that is, like, I do have enough financial stability that I would, it would cause a little bit of strife at home. But it's like, if I have to buy a new phone, like, we could do it. That's one way that people achieve, peace in their life. But it's a lie that we can make enough wealth that we're always going to be able to provide for everything that we could lose. But so I think here's what I'm trying to say. I don't feel like I've done a good job of saying this. There's a couple of paths to contentment. One is a lie. One is reliable. The lie is that I can always make enough money and always have enough that I won't have needs anymore, or when I have needs, I can always meet them self-sufficiently. Mm-hmm. And it's a lie. What happens is people can take stuff from you digitally faster than you can lock it up, and
Stuff
the
can
economy
happen.
changes.
Yeah.
Like everything changes. Wars come. The reliable mode to being content in all circumstances is to grow painstakingly throughout life, a kind of God reliance and this verse 8 kind of mentality that says, hey, there's still clothes on my back. We still have a car. We can still get home. My wife's got a phone. We can still let our friends know what's going on. Like, we're going to be okay. And stinks. We're going to have to pay for another phone, but like, we can work this out. And, there's a different kind of deeper reliance on God that can give us the ability that when we're on the hotline, the customer hotline, and they just won't cancel or whatever it is, that it's like, hey, I still have enough breath in my body. This is a human. I can still ask them how their day is.
Yeah.
I can ask them nicely, would you just go to one more manager for me? I know you don't want to do that. I'm sorry about that, but we got to deal with this thing. There's just a different way of being and acting. And I think we can all take some steps towards it.
Yeah, that's good.
It's like it's a perspective.
That's a better path.
shift. Yeah, I try to do that because I think, you talked about like travel abroad if you want to be grateful for our country. Like, it's the same thing as it pertains to money and wealth and finances and stuff like that. I mean, there's always somebody richer than you. There's always somebody worse off than you too. And sometimes if we just zoom out a little bit. And I'll do this with my kids. It's like, oh, can't believe we can't do this. I'm like, yeah, imagine if, we lived on a dirt floor, that'd be rough. Imagine if you had to walk 3 hours to get the clean water, that'd be hard, but it's just a perspective shift. And I've often thought about like what enabled what enabled like Paul to be singing praise songs to God in the prison cell? You know what I mean? When he had nothing, he had not a dollar to his name, no clothes, no nothing. You know what I mean? Like you've got zero, but he had the thing that they couldn't take away. You know, he had a sure anchor, a sure hope. You know, in that situation, and if we, you know, even if we drop all of our possessions into the toilet of a plane, you know, and we have nothing left, it's like we still have everything, sort of, in a sense. And it's like, you know, can we still find that place? Can we still like be thankful and grateful, you know, for being in Christ and for what he's done for us, you know, regardless of all the possessions getting stripped away and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And people will do stuff for you. Like people will do an incredible number of things for you, especially when you're like kind and patient with them. I don't mean that manipulatively. I just mean like whenever you're really without, there's a lot of people that will do what they can to help you. It's the kind of spiritual treasure that I think Jesus is talking about when he says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And also Paul says this to Timothy here in this passage too that we've been talking about. Command the rich to be good, to be rich in good deeds, to do good, be rich in good deeds, and be generous and willing to share. In this way, they'll lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. It's like relational treasure. It's interpersonal treasure. You care for another person, they return care for you. And God cares for all, and he loves it when you love his children.
It's interesting. You're highlighting the relational aspect of that, the relational treasure. It's also, this is what's mysterious. Jesus just acts like when we do stuff for him, it's going to matter forever. It's like, hey, that's really precious. It's going to be precious to God. You're going to have a reward. You'll always be glad you did that. You give a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in my name. Truly, I tell you, you'll never lose your reward. So like what we do matters. Rich people, let's include us, are commanded to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. And he's saying that'll last forever. Hey, you'll be really glad. It's mysterious, but there'll be a reward in heaven, in a new heavens and a new earth. You'll always be glad you did that, and you'll never lose it. Hey, let's talk about this a little bit. You know, the motivation we see here, a posture, not a percentage, is what's described. Hey, here's the right way to try to be rich. Try to be rich in good deeds, and that'll last forever. That's the firm foundation for the coming age, not your retirement account, not your portfolio of retirement account, but your portfolio of good deeds. And meet your maker with that, and you'll be really glad. I don't know. I'm struck by how New Testament giving. It's not. We don't have a new Leviticus, but we have. We're called to have hearts shaped by Jesus, and His goodness to us in the gospel. Now let's live out of that. You know, we shouldn't try to be. Hey, let's try to be less generous than they were in the Old Testament. Let's be more generous because of the grace of Jesus.
Yeah. There's a lot of a couple of months ago, social media kind of lit up over this because I can't even remember who it was, and I probably wouldn't say their name if I did, but there was some major preacher who had been preaching very hardcore that, you know, we're to give 10% and above, right? And then he kind of reversed course on that. And he was like, you know what? That's not really in the New Testament. And so the principle is a posture of generosity and stuff like that. And he, you know, so he kind of like switched his teaching on it. And I guess a lot of people who were in his camp were like kind of felt betrayed by it. And then all, you know, the debate ensues over these kinds of things. But you know, when you look back, and you mentioned, Steve, on Sunday, like this wasn't just like a flat, hey, 10% is the number of, you know, you take 10% of your money and you give it, you know, every month. Like that's not even really a good understanding of what was happening in the Old Testament system. It's a whole with layers of tithing and taxing, and it wasn't just about money. It was, it was on your crops and your animals and all that kind of stuff.
That sort of was their money. Yeah, it was like where their wealth was.
Yeah.
So like they'd bring animals. But yeah, a tenth of everything plus the festival tithe. Every 2 out of 3 years, people take an additional tenth of the remaining, and then the charity tithe every third year, another tenth. So it's really in between 17 and 23%. And so, yeah, we don't want to say, hey, it would be lame if as wealthy Americans were like, sweet, the tithe isn't in effect. Let's go to Best Buy. That's the response. But more like, hey, let's be impacted by the gospel, the grace of Jesus. And let's, I'm very mindful. Who will hear this podcast? There's single moms who are stressed to the max, who faithfully give less, and that is precious to God. There are also people in our wider community and in the church who can give 10%, not feel it at all. It's like not even adjust their life at all to love people and see the name of Jesus go forth in the world. And I more want to like, hey, let's challenge those folks that think about it. Have your giving be shaped by the gospel. And there's some people who will hear this sermon that just like probably haven't really gotten in the game yet. Like, hey, begin to be a disciple of Jesus. Begin to be a disciple of Jesus in this area as in other areas. I'm ready to kick this to Brad. What helped you over the years grow in this area? What was challenging to you? How were you discipled in this area?
So I was fortunate to have grown up in a Christian home where my parents modeled tithing, giving, and generosity. And we didn't talk a whole lot about money growing up, but they always
weren't worried about it. They just like, that's just what they did.
I wouldn't say they weren't worried about it. Yeah, because I didn't ever get a sense that there was a lot of excess. My father was an officer in the Army, single family income, and a lot of times you think about that and you're like, oh, an officer in the Army, that's like royalty. It's not really. They make a good living, but you're not like an executive in a corporation or something like that. And they chose single family living, and so they had to make choices around where the money was going to go and how they were going to invest.
Yeah,
exactly. Yep. And so for my sister and I, we got allowances, and it was always a matter of teaching saving and teaching tithing from an allowance, which it's cute when you're a kid, but that continues on through high school and whatnot. And as I reflect on it, I was like, that was a really good practice, and we try to do the same thing for our kids. But it's also a little challenging because what I look back and think about is it's pretty easy to get into a routine of tithe where you don't really think about what that amount is that you're tithing every time. And that was 100% excess that you're tithing from, because my food, my clothing, my house, my everything was covered by my parents at that point in time. And so it was just really a matter of what I could choose to spend it on or not. And that changed when I got married and when we started our own family.
Sure, that did change, but still, that's probably a cool idea for parents to think about. You taught your kids, here's your allowance, and you were taught, here's an allowance. Hey, guess what we're going to teach you to do with that? You're going to learn to share it, which sounds like that would be good for a kid.
I think it is good. And we tried to do the same with our children, where we said, here is some, and it's tied to the work that you do. And so if you don't do your work, you also don't get your allowance that's coming in, or it's adjusted.
That sounds like something that happens in the world.
Yeah, right?
And you don't get paid anyway. That's a lesson.
And it's a matter of every time it comes into your hands, think about thankfulness and giving back, because it's not yours to begin with. And then have a plan for a portion of it, and then use the rest to live your life. When we were married, what I found as I moved into this period where that same mentality, then I would say I transitioned into reluctant giving, Because now, being an analytical person, I wanted to have a plan, and I was thinking about how to meet Christy's needs and the family's needs and what's it going to look like in the future and if we have kids and when we have kids in college and all these things. And construct that plan, and I found myself probably holding on a little bit more and being reluctant. Or if there was an additional need that was identified in the church, it was a matter of how's this going to affect my plan and will I be able to achieve this? But the reality of it is my plan wasn't so hot. Like, it kept on running into wrinkles, and my thought was always that it was going to get better when I started to see these pieces come together, and there was always another vehicle breakdown, another move, or something else that was coming. But around me, I had other people that I knew were also making less, because money is super transparent in the military. You know exactly what the people around you are making on a day-by-day basis.
It's all like in a spreadsheet, right? So if
Absolutely.
you're like, yeah, you're in this rank. This is what you get paid. Sure.
Yeah. Yep. And so everybody knows what everybody's making, assuming it's a single income that's there. And I was seeing models of believing friends that were extremely generous with less and not at all worried about the plan in the future and the way they were living out their faith. Like, they had a plan, but they weren't worried about that plan when they had to make adjustments to it for reasons. And it impacted me. And then I think probably the biggest piece is that when we were living in El Paso, I was asked to teach a class on Crown Financial Ministries, financial management. And so now all of a sudden I was, again, we were very transparent with one another as far as finances, and it made me rethink. And then I had to learn a lot more about tithing and systems and the translation of Old Testament to New Testament.
Who's the guy behind Crown? What's the...
It's not Dave Ramsey. I can't remember the guy that was behind Crown Financial Ministries.
Okay. I'm sorry, I digressed.
But
I'll look
it was a great class that we
But it
went
was
through.
helpful.
Yeah, and again, to me, and then Christy and I talking about it, I just realized, I think I'm approaching this from the wrong reason. This is not something that I'm doing out of thankfulness, and I'm trying to control. And so
Larry
that's...
Burkett.
There you go.
Got it. Yeah.
That's where, again, it goes back to the foundation of Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains, and all who dwell in it. So not just my possessions, but me and my wife and my children. My children aren't really mine. My children are God's. Everything. And it's just, that was the wake-up call where it's a matter of, how about you just try to be thankful and fruitful and worry about giving, and then the rest will get taken care of. And over time, we really did see that was an approach. And so I agree. It's really tough to get to, like, what is the percentage and how do you do it? And the message that we even talked about was, yeah, it's not super black and white, but it is pretty clear that you're called to give, and we're cleared to show love through generosity and not treat it like it's our own, but it is God's instead. Start there, read, pray about it, listen to the conviction of the Holy Spirit, change, adjust. When something comes in and it's a matter of, oof, this is going to hurt, but I truly believe this is the right thing to do, then hurt a little bit and give and go.
What do you guys do? Do you and Christy discuss hey, this is what our goal for giving is going to be for the year? Or how do you think about planning that kind of stuff? Because here's some history. This was true of the Liberty churches that I planted and pastored for years, and also Covenant. Special offerings are exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa. Hey, we can do this the regular day in, day out, just being faithful.
Yeah.
So the lights are on. So that's what I call the non-sexy offering,
Yeah.
Just to pay for stuff, to pay to cut the grass out in front of the church, and we're at 202. That's not as exciting, but we need to be faithful. I'd love to hear how you think about planning.
Disclaimer, this is our approach, and I'm open for feedback if it's not the right approach.
This is what
All
the
right?
podcast is for.
So I know, even having talked about this journey, that my heart is still bent towards selfishness. And so if I don't have a plan or an amount that we're going to choose to give, and I'm just looking for the opportunity, I'm more prone to find an opportunity to buy something for me than I am to give something to somebody else.
So you're so you just plan to hey, this is what I'm aiming to give.
And so there's a percentage that we say, that's our tithe. That goes to support the church, and we automate it. So I don't even have to think about it. It's just rolling in every 2 weeks. And that, thankfully, that is our base tithe. And I think that we've met our commitment, quote, commitment, if you think about it like an obligation that's there. And you're right, it is just kind of like that's coming through. But there is still an excitement in that. When you look at the church and you're like, wow, I get to be a part of this. The salaries of the people that are there, the ministries that happen that are going out. Like, just that, what you might think of as boring tithe, does awesome stuff.
Yeah.
And we can be a part of the church through that. And then after that, the real fun is when you have more that comes in. And this is where Christy and I have had, because that was a pretty easy conversation. More of the conversation is when you get a windfall, when you make money on selling a house, when you get an unexpected promotion, when you get like an inheritance or something come in. That's all a harvest in my mind. You're like, what are you going to do with that? And that's another opportunity to think about big needs that are out there and to do some cool stuff. And I think, Jonathan, you mentioned right hand and left hand, or maybe that was Josh.
Yeah.
That's, in most cases, I do think it's developing a heart perspective of where it's something that you're not doing publicly and attaching a name to it so that you get acclaim and favor. But you can still take a lot of joy in seeing how God spreads his money around,
You're not showing up to church every Sunday with a giant check. Like
No. No.
Right. So, and just to remind everyone,
let's meet in the Brad Hummel conference room.
the Jesus said, when possible, do our giving in secret, and that way, we're not looking for the reward or recognition, and it's precious to God.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you look for opportunities. There's like a baseline giving that you're doing, but you also, hey, stuff happens. You sell a house or a promotion or something like that, and then there's a decision like, hey, what could we bless?
Yeah. Like,
That's cool.
missionaries don't get year-end bonuses.
No, they do not.
And if anybody's close to missionaries, the fundraising process is rough. Typically, it goes to you're going to commit a certain amount every month, and then you're just trusting that that amount's going to come in every once in a while. But if you support a missionary and you get a windfall, it's a pretty cool surprise for a missionary to get a year-end bonus that shows up unexpected. Like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
I liked what you were
I had
saying.
a staff
about,
member
okay.
one time that was like, wait, we don't get year-end bonuses here? I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. But no, that's a cool perspective. Go ahead.
I liked what you were saying about the excitement you feel about the sort of the mundane, the non-sexy offering things. 'Cause I think that is possibly one of the traps we could fall into is when we automate things, when we plan ahead and we say, this way I don't even have to think about it. It's like, well, is that missing the point then? Is it missing the point to be like, if the goal is generosity, if the goal is sacrificial giving, etc., and then we automate the giving, so it's like, it happens whether I'm feeling generous or not. It happens whether I'm feeling reluctant or not. It's like, then it's good that you did it, but it is also at the same time sort of missing the point, because if the point is to be generous and you're doing it out of a sense of obligation and not out of a sense of generosity, then there's something out of alignment there, right? So
there's probably some balance in there, right? Because it's okay if it's like, hey, when someone decides I want to regularly be generous, so I'm going to automate it.
yeah.
But then also try to have enough gas in the tank so you can respond to a need,
Right.
Well,
and so that it doesn't become like lumped into a category. Like, we probably all have a lot of things that are automated every month, and it's like the cable company and the car loan and all this stuff that like comes out of our account, and that's a whole like category of people who like, kind of have their hands in our pocket, so to speak. Like, some of our money is just going out, to this or that group. But that's why I was saying I like what you were saying, that there's a sense of being a part of something, and that you're excited for that, because it's easy for us to just categorize it with, well, this is just another one of my monthly bills, you know what I mean? Which again is to me, then we're not quite hitting the mark as far as like it's an outward show of a generous spirit, that we have.
We were actually talking about this morning. The act of giving and the collection of the offering, it's not like a worship halftime. Hey, we've been worshiping, now we're going to do something else.
Yeah.
It is an act of worship, So I would like to have it so, all the people who give online are able to think about that. We're going to pray for the offering. We're going to pray this is stewarded well to use for the glory of God, that people are loved, ministry supported. And Lord, we offer this to you. It needs to be part of regular Christian worship, even in the community. This is an act of worship. I know you know about this kind of stuff. Well, it's one of the sacrifices of praise. Yeah. The sacrifices of the New Testament it's the fruit of our lips. It's praising God with our words and song, and also the doing good deeds.
Yeah.
And the offerings are a sacrifice that we bring out of gratitude, out of love to God.
All worship is a response, right? So it's us responding to who God is, to what He's done, and giving is, the generosity and the cheerfulness and the excitement we have about giving is all a response within the context of understanding what Christ has done for us. So, one of the things that, I'm not. Every church does it differently, but one of the things I've seen that I really appreciated, some churches will just have offering plates or buckets or whatever they have, and there's no offering time.
Yeah.
It's just whenever you feel like, hey, I've been so impacted by this song, this message, this scripture, this whatever. Yeah. I just got to respond with a gift to the Lord, and people just get up and do that whenever they want, and it's good because it kind of gets us away from here's the moment where we are passing the plates or whichever way we're doing it. So it's not like there's a right way or wrong way, but that's just one thing that I've seen that's helpful.
Different approach.
Right in the middle of the sermon, just walk up and put something on the edge of the stage. You know what I mean? You would think it was distracting, but it's actually kind of cool to see sometimes.
Interesting. That's an interesting thing. What Brad, what would you say to someone who's like, look, I'm new to this, man. I've never given to a church. I'm kind of afraid. I'm a little freaked out about finances. What would you say to stir them up?
It's an act of faith. And faith is a funny thing, This is something that it's a trusting measure to give some back. It's something that I think is biblical, and so it's a statement of what we believe in as well. I guess I would tell them, dip your toes in the water.
Yeah, step out in faith.
Yeah, and just see what's going to happen, because I do think as you continue to grow in your relationship with Christ, this is an area that you continue to grow in, and your perspective changes over time too, as you get there. And the other thing that I would tie into a little bit of what we were talking about with the sacrifices and what you just mentioned too, as far as the resource piece, is, of course, we're talking primarily about money, like the transfer of funds from account to account or money into a plate. But there was also the feast element of where there was a portion of the offering that was eaten, and it wasn't eaten individually, it was eaten collectively. And so people who brought food and could worship with that grain offering fed people that didn't have as much too. And so that's another aspect of where it translates into generosity. And it doesn't have to be about, he's just putting money in. Now, granted, I think we're called to do that. But it's also about looking within the church and outside of the church, about how we turn a portion of this offering into generosity, not just to enjoy it, but to feed those with us that may not have as much too. Like, treat others to dinner. Strangers, treat them to dinner sometime. See what happens. People love that.
It would be so, you get to know people in a different way if you have a meal together. It's very biblical, sharing meals. We're actually going to do a series I think in the spring, called Meals with Jesus. And in Luke, so much of the action around the Gospel of Luke is centered around the table. You know, Jesus gets in trouble because of who he eats with and the feasts that he, you know, the feast that he enjoys. Oh, he's eating with people whose lives are really shady right there. It's like he likes them or something. But yeah, that kind of, man, think of how countercultural that would be, that kind of hospitality post-COVID. Let's share meals with people with gospel intentionality. Let's express gospel welcome around the table. Yeah, it's really important. And it's part of the welcome that we've received.
It can be hard sometimes because sometimes we're just like one or two steps removed from the gift being given and the gift being received. You know, like, you know, we send money over to, you know, Zimbabwe. We send money to different missions, different places, you know, different missionaries doing all kinds of work. And it's like, on one hand, if you were there and you saw the need, you'd be like, of course I'll meet that need. You know what I mean? But then when we're at home and we're like, hey, the need is just being told to me verbally. I don't actually see it. It's not. I'm like I can't touch it and feel it. You know what I mean? Then it's, you know, we're less inclined a lot of times. You know, so sometimes maybe part of stewardship and part of stirring people up into this is saying, like, you know, touch it, feel it, like see where the needs are. You know what I mean? See where money goes, and you know what kind of needs it meets and things like that.
Let's do that locally. Let's do that. I think about, you know, Pete and Tanner, the video that they made, the missions trips that they went on.
That's huge.
How it changes when people see the impact.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, see the project. That's huge. It's a role that church leaders play in the New Testament, is to connect people with needs. So in 2 Corinthians, Paul has extensive teaching. He's taking an offering for famine relief in Judea, outside Jerusalem. And it's he's taking an offering for mostly suffering Jews from Gentiles. And he doesn't have a video clip. They can't watch the needy people. You know, Sarah McLachlan is not singing over a late night infomercial. He just has to say, hey, this is happening. And hey, man, these other churches showed up. I know that you don't want to be that guy who these other churches, man, jumped at the chance to do this. As you excel in all these other areas, excel in this area. True. Try to do well at this in the area of giving. And he gives them some practical instruction, and also just seeks to motivate them with the gospel. But yeah, that's one thing that hopefully that we're trying to do at Covenant, is have leaders make those connections.
Yeah.
You know, I've never been to Zimbabwe. A lot of people are fired up, though, in this church about Zimbabwe. And this church has given a lot to Zimbabwe-related causes. It's really exciting. I've been to South Africa, though. And right now, Covenant, we're the biggest supporter. We gave $8,000 to this church planner named Sabu. And in South Africa, his house, dude, is like this studio. And he's planning in this huge township, a lot of people in shanties. He's doing a great work, and it's a privilege to support him. And that's because I, by God's grace, had the chance to meet him and connect with him and see the work. It's actually something that we see in the New Testament. Christian leaders make those connections.
Yep.
And now people in Bucks County, hey, man, you give the Covenant, you're a part of that. And guess what? There's $60,000 more we're giving to missions this year. It's pretty exciting. I'm pretty pumped about that.
Yeah.
We're giving a lot more money away to missions.
And if I can tie on to that one for just a second, I completely agree. Like, once you go to some of these areas that are the foreign missions, like, there's a portion of your heart that is never going to leave there, and you're going to want to support that community. I would also say that not too far from us, we have the same opportunity. That the same statistics that you mentioned as far as net worth. I was in a session at work last week where they were talking about healthcare inequities, and that then dovetailed into social and economic inequities. And one of the statistics that they talked about, and they were using Princeton, not too far from here, and Trenton as the two examples, 15 miles apart. One has a net worth average, I think median net worth, I want to say it's either 186,000 or 300,000. Princeton. Trenton was 7,000
Net worth.
net worth.
Average net
That
worth.
means you sell
$7,000.
everything.
Right.
$7,000. And if you think about an expense today, like a car breakdown, a major
Right.
house issue, how quickly that evaporates. But
Right.
there's a huge difference. It's there. And then the people that live on those margins, there's opportunity to do real gospel work in our backyard.
Locally. Trenton is not that far away. The poorest big city in America is Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Reading. There's places in our state. I said this, and maybe this would be we could end the podcast this way. I'm not nervous. I'm excited. If we seek to grow as a church in this area, the good that we could do in the region and in the world. I'm really excited about what it could mean for our state and other areas really close by, like the Trenton and Reading and Philadelphia, and also right here in Bucks County. Code Blue training. Let's love the homeless when it gets really cold. So a lot to talk about. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being on the podcast. Good job, guys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Covenant Table podcast. We'll see you next time.
I'm never going to be asked to clap again.
Your second clap was great.
I know.
Good job, guys.
They only remember the weak one.
I think this one will feel better if we listen to it.